Tom, thanks very much for joining us. You're in Switzerland, but
yes.
I hope it's not out of order to say that I think you've got some, on the back of the Nico Hulkenberg announcement to Force India, that you've got some news as well.
Yes, well, I am leaving Sauber at the end of the season and joining Force India next year. So a bit of a new challenge for me there, and yeah, looking forward to working with Nico again there.
Well, the first thing that needs to be said is congratulations on the job you did at Sauber. Superb work this year. Sadly for you, only 1 year there. But what position will you be taking up at Force India?
Yeah, so it's the same role, head of trackside they call it here at Sauber, chief race engineer it's called at Force India, but basically in charge of the engineers trackside, and then reporting back to the technical director at the factory to help improve, develop the car during the season.
And it hasn't escaped our notice, of course, that you and Nico Hulkenberg go back a long, long way.
Yes, it's. He's following me at the moment, to be honest. But in his first test in 2007, with whilst we were both at Williams, was a long time ago now, and we supported him during his Formula 3 and GP2 campaigns, and then I went with him to the race team at Williams for a season. He obviously went off to Force India. And joining me at Sauber for this season, and then yes, we're going back to working together next year. So I know him pretty well.
Well, it's going to be. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? We look back 12 months, and there are actually quite a lot of doomsayers talking about Force India, and there was a lot of stuff in the press about will they continue at all. And I have to put my hand up and say I've always been a fan of the team, and I was not one of those who was constantly putting the nails in the coffin 12 months ago. And I'm very pleased to see now how much energy there is around the team, not only with Nico going back, but with people like you there, and Andy's done such a great job on the car this year. It's a shame that they seem to kind of lose some momentum mid-season, I guess, when the Pirelli tyres changed a bit. And you, conversely, at Sauber, you picked up, really, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. I think between the two teams, from my understanding, there's slightly different strategies with developing the current year's car. So obviously, they scored a lot of points pretty early in the season. When your teams of similar sizes to Sauber, ourselves, and Force India, you can't just develop continually and forget next year's car and always have resource to do everything. You have to sort of pick your battles a little bit, and for us we had a few problems with the car at the start, or areas we could see we could drastically improve, so we decided to work on those. From my understanding, the guys at Force India stopped work on this year's car. It didn't look like it developed a lot from the outside anyway, and from what they said in the press, and concentrated a lot on next year's car. So, yeah, slightly different strategies. Yes, the tyres in the middle of the season definitely, I think, didn't hurt us, helped us in some areas, and possibly went against what was being done for those guys. But, yeah.
Tom, we have Rob Wilson here in the studio, a man I think you know pretty well by now. And you mentioned 2014, and I'm interested from both of you, actually, both your perspective, as to what we can expect in 2014 in terms of what the cars are going to demand of the drivers. And I wonder if I could just begin with you, Tom, by asking you to give us, in your view, the sorts of critical areas that the drivers are going to need to be working on, and I guess the performance parameters of the car around which they're going to have to work: torque, fuel management, etc., etc.
Well, hi there, Rob.
Hi, Tom.
And hope you're good. Yes, I think with the big change in regulations, the new powertrain, it's something which the engineers and the drivers are going to have to adapt to. I think come qualifying mode, there won't be a vast difference. Obviously, the engine torque delivery isn't going to be the same. Come racing, there's a lot of talk, and I haven't had my head too much into all the numbers, to be honest. But there's a lot of talk of obviously needing to manage the fuel and that side of things from a strategic point of view. whether you elect to be quicker at different stages of the race when the tyres are doing different things. I think fundamentally, as a driver and race engineering crew, you still have to do the same job you're doing now as far as understanding the aerodynamics of the car, how the tyres work, getting the most out of the complete package and the driver. Rob knows a lot about working with drivers, so that job is still key to do. But on top of that, the strategic side of things, the role for the strategy engineers and the powertrain ones will become even more important this year, or should I say next year, when they're looking at the best way to get the car to the end of the race, not only as quickly as possible and also not running out of fuel, but also using the potential of powertrain options to help with the strategy and playing with the tyre wear and degradation. There's going to be a lot more a few more parameters to play with.
And we're assuming, I think, Tom, that Pirelli, at least at the start of the year, are going to be relatively conservative because of the number of unknowns. But that being the case, Rob, let's talk about torque, T-O-R-Q-U-E, and how a driver can use that to his advantage, or indeed perhaps how he can abuse torque.
Well, that ramps up pretty suddenly, more than the actual power to the wheels. Whenever you've got a turbo car, which we've obviously raced many times, the ramping up of that power once you've been on the throttle for a moment is quite considerable. So you do want to make sure you've been a fair way around the corner before, and trying to get the wheels straight a little bit and get the, therefore, weight back on the driving wheels fairly late in the proceedings, because the chances of traction problems will exist. So therefore, but often you want to just warm the car as well and get that turbo going. Now, Tom will probably tell us better, but I'm assuming there will be very little turbo delay in these cars.
Yeah, and Tom, I think you've probably been in these discussions as well, but from what I gather, that if there is any delay, that can be effectively nullified by the electric motor that
That's right,
the
yeah.
ancillary motor
Yeah.
there. But you don't really want to have to resort to that. You'd really want the driver not to be able to do that with the throttle, I guess, his use of the throttle.
Yes, I think the job for the engineers, ultimately, it's a pretty complex set of parameters when you first look at it all, but you have to always give yourself back to what the driver needs. He's still got a race car to drive, and you have to give him the power in a way that he can get out the corner, getting the most out of the Pirelli tyres, which we're learning more and more about all the time. Fundamentally, I think, and you guys were around in the era more than me maybe, but people have had Pirelli tyres and a lot of torque and turbocharged engines, qualifying engines many years ago, and these are all parameters which it's very easy to make it easier for the driver. You can always take torque away, especially in the area where the tyres can't quite put the traction down at low car speeds. Like in the old traction control days. The difficult bit's going to be, from a global optimization point of view, the most efficient way of getting the fastest, end product, and yet having a car and torque delivery that the drivers, with, as you know, even with Pirelli sort of saying they're going to be conservative, still once the tyres get old and they wear out, the degradation is still there, some tracks more than others, depending on the severity and the track temperatures, etc. But still, you're going to need to give the driver the tools to get out the corner without adversely damaging the tyres due to bad torque delivery. But that's something which simulator work will help, plus getting out on track. Like all these things, it's a matter of doing it, the driver coming back and saying, well, it's a bit different to the simulator, the tyre model's not always exactly the same. I feel that this area, the torque comes a bit too quick, and you'll have a group of powertrain guys and the data engineers all looking into giving the best solution.
And Rob, the fundamentals, just give us a brief, very brief list of the fundamentals. You talked it earlier, the car's got to be more or less straight, we don't want to have too much power on too soon. It all sounds relatively straightforward and logical, very difficult actually to put all that together.
Well, depending on the person. Some people are natural at it, some people have to work at it, some people will never get it. What it effectively is effective direction change so that you've got less corner ahead of you when it's time to put the throttle down. Another point, because we're talking about fuel consumption here, that it means pulling back from being the first on the throttle, you know, to get that 2k higher minimum speed, because when the load's in the car, it's the least economical place to be going full throttle. Cars simply don't accelerate as fast and therefore don't go as far on their fuel if you're looking for an early throttle, a traditional late turn and an early throttle, because you'll be off the throttle a bit earlier to achieve that. You'll probably be on the throttle the same percentage of a lap. That percentage, say it's 60% of the lap is full throttle, pretend. Then that 60% wants to be when the car's almost in a dragster position, because then it won't have much drag on it. It'll be better for the tyres, of course, but it'll go further on the fuel. So everything that we're talking about, and we did look at this before about the direction change with Sebastian versus Mark Webber there, and that shorter corner, get the car flatter. And if you're going to go full throttle, do it when the car's at its flattest. So it's going to be a little bit less the traditional geometrically perfect line, which is a term we're coming up with more these days, and more direction change for the car, a flat car, so that you go further on your fuel, and also you're not wearing your tyres out as much. Both things are working in sympathy there.
I'm starting to feel a bit sorry for this company called Gill, who I think have won the... well, I'm not sure winning is the right word, but they are building the FIA to be supplied by the FIA fuel meter regulators, and I can't imagine they're going to have an easy time, that's for sure. To get, I don't know how many they're going to have to build, but they're going to have to be consistent within 0.1 or 2%. But when Rob is then talking about the difference between drivers, just in the way you're going to be using fuel around the lap, it's going to be, I think the fuel meters, I think, are going to be one of the biggest talking points in the pit lane in the first 2 or 3 races. I don't know what you think about that, Tom.
Yeah, for sure. You can't afford to have a high fuel error and not finish the race. You know, that would be catastrophic. So you've got to look at what is order one, what is the most important thing, and you know, to finish first you've got to finish, as the saying goes. But next year, at the start of the year, not only from a fuel understanding and total powertrain management point of view, and the reliability of the car is obviously going to be a bit different next year with a lot of new systems on the car. But fundamentally, nothing matters the whole race weekend if you don't finish the race. So therefore, there'll be a lot of monitoring. You know, as a trackside engineer, I've heard many times people complaining about fuel errors just on a normal petrol-engined Formula One car. There's always talks of, you know, the fuel going in, the fuel going out, you know, what is the acceptable error. You know, it's like the old bleed the brakes, I've got a long pedal. The drivers always moan about that. The engineers are always moaning about fuel errors, and this is something which we just got to, it's one of our most important aspects, and we'll be working hard in winter testing to make sure we've got good confidence that when we go into a racing situation, we know not only just are we going to finish, but also make sure, you know, the opposite side is a disaster as well. If you hold your performance back in a race, finish the race with too much fuel, it's just as bad as running out, you know. So, yeah, it's going to be a very important area for the teams to get on top of. And as you say, from a sensor point of view, sensors that go wrong could cause a lot of problems. So the company you mentioned, I dare say they're putting a lot of effort into making sure they've got a good product.
Tom, Rob, the mechanics splash. I don't know if that's a term that's used these days, but it was very common back in the 60s where Colin Chapman would insist that this is all the fuel you get for the race, don't run any more, and the mechanics would frequently have a little pint of fuel that they would put in addition. It was known as the mechanics splash, and that often got the car just across the finish line in time. So is that something that you'll be employing at Force India, I assume?
I'm hoping it's a little bit more scientific than the old little splash here and there. But you'd be amazed the lengths that teams go to weigh and measure the fuel. The money that's spent on fuel rigs and weighing procedures and double checking and monitoring through a weekend. Obviously, injector sets. It's a very important factor because every kilo matters. And nowadays, even in 2013. The way that the fuel is put in the car, it's not done to run the whole race flat out max power. It's done to be overall the fastest car either to the end of the race or to the last pit stop. You've got lots of different parameters you can play with, but just putting the max power fuel into a car isn't the fastest way around. As you often hear a lot of people on the radios talking about saving fuel, and sometimes they've used a bit more fuel than they allowed for. And I don't think there's many mechanics last little splashes going in nowadays, but you never know.
No more mechanic splashes, Tom.